The grand chandelier above shimmered like 1,000 stars. Samantha's hands trembled, gripping the silver tray. She had been silent for far too long, but today was different. As Victor Delacroix, the billionaire who owned everything in sight, sat at the head of the table, the words she had kept locked inside for years escaped her lips. "You don't know the half of it, Mr. Delacroix," she said, her voice steady but fierce. The room fell silent. Her truth had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Samantha Carter had been working as a maid in the Delacroix mansion for nearly 5 years. Every morning, before the first light of dawn, she would slip into her worn shoes and head out to the kitchen. The mansion was a sprawling estate, polished and pristine, an empire built from Victor Delacroix's unyielding pursuit of wealth. The rooms gleamed with marble floors, gold-framed paintings, and lavish chandeliers. To everyone else, the Delacroix family was untouchable, above reproach, and undeniably perfect. Victor Delacroix, a billionaire entrepreneur in his late 40s, had a reputation for being ruthless, driven by power and control. His icy demeanor left no room for warmth, and he treated his employees, especially the ones like Samantha, as though they were invisible. He was tall, with sharp features that mirrored his cold, calculating nature. His suits were always immaculate, his gaze always piercing. To him, Samantha and the others who worked in his home were merely tools, necessary but dispensable. His wife, Celeste, was a woman of elegance, always poised and composed. She wore a mask of kindness, but Samantha could see the distance in her eyes. Celeste rarely spoke, never engaging in any real conversation with Samantha, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. Both women were caught in the same system, forced into roles they had no power to change. Samantha's family, meanwhile, was the opposite of the Delacroix'. Her mother, ill and frail, lived in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Her younger brother, Jamal, had run into trouble with the law, the latest in a long string of bad decisions. Samantha had been the one to hold everything together, to keep the household running, while silently watching her own dreams fade. But she was determined to protect them, no matter what it cost. For years she had silently borne the insults, the dismissals, and the quiet cruelty of her employer. She kept her head down, smiled when asked, and did her work without question. But beneath the surface, a fire had been growing, a fire fueled by years of feeling less than, unseen, and unheard. That fire would ignite soon, though, and Victor Delacroix would be the first to feel its heat. The rain battered the windows, relentless and unforgiving, as Samantha worked in the grand dining room of the Delacroix mansion. The storm outside had cast the house in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crack of thunder. She moved quietly, dusting the expensive furniture with the same mechanical precision she had perfected over the years. But tonight, the usual sense of routine felt different. As she adjusted the silverware, her mind wandered to her mother's condition. The doctors had said her mother's time was running out. It weighed on Samantha constantly. Every hour spent in this mansion, cleaning up after people who didn't even know her name, felt like a cruel joke. But it was the only life she knew. She was lost in thought when a sudden voice broke her from her reverie. Victor Delacroix. "Where is that boy? I need him to clean the garage by the end of the day." His words were cold, like everything else about him. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. Victor had been kind to her. Never. He treated the staff like furniture, as though they existed to serve him and were disposable the moment they ceased to be useful. But she had expected this, the demand to have his orders obeyed at any cost. But something was different tonight. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was a storm brewing, one that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Victor's voice came again, sharp and abrupt. "I told you, Samantha, I want Jamal to take care of it. If he's so busy with his nonsense, maybe he should start being useful for once." The words hit like a slap. She froze, her hand still on the polished surface of the table. Jamal, her brother. The one person she had tried to protect from the world. The one person who had slipped through her fingers time and time again. He had made mistakes, bad ones, but Samantha refused to let anyone blame him, least of all Victor Delacroix. "Sir," she said, her voice more steady than she felt, "Jamal's been through a lot lately. He's not—" Victor's face darkened as he interrupted her, his eyes narrowing. He's a burden on you, Samantha, and you're still here, cleaning up after him. You'd do better to cut ties with him before he drags you down with him." Her breath caught in her throat. She had been silent for years, swallowed every insult, every sharp glance, but this time something inside her stirred. She clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. It wasn't just Jamal. It was the years of resentment, the years of having to lower her head to silently bear the weight of people like Victor who used their wealth and status as weapons. She hadn't expected the words to leave her mouth. "You don't know anything about my family, Mr. Delacroix." For a moment the room was still. The words hung in the air between them like an electric charge. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and anger bubbling beneath the surface. She had never spoken to him this way before, never dared. She could feel the shift, the tension between them growing, thickening. She didn't know where it would lead, but she couldn't pull back now. Victor stared at her, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps. For the first time he seemed unsure of himself. The storm outside raged louder, but the storm within the walls of the mansion felt even more intense. Samantha didn't know why she had said it. It was a moment of madness, of rebellion, but it was a moment that would set everything in motion. She could feel it, the thin thread of mystery between them. Victor Delacroix was no longer the man who simply controlled the mansion, the man who saw her as a servant. Now there was something else, something deeper, something that would either destroy her or change everything she knew. And she couldn't look away. Victor stood there, his gaze fixed on her, as if he were trying to read the depth of her soul. Samantha's heart raced. She had spoken those words without thinking, without even fully understanding why, but now that they hung in the air, she felt a sense of both fear and exhilaration. Victor's silence stretched on. For a moment, Samantha thought he might yell, might demand she leave his house and never return. But instead, his lips parted slowly, as though searching for the right words. "You've got guts, Samantha," he said finally, his voice colder than usual, but with a tinge of something else, something she couldn't place. Samantha swallowed hard. She didn't know if she should apologize, if she should shrink back into her role as the quiet, invisible maid. But she stood her ground. "You don't know what it's like to struggle," she said, her voice firmer now. "You sit in your office, surrounded by wealth and power, while people like me, like my family, we're left to fight for every scrap we can get." Victor's eyes flickered. He was a man who had everything, a man who had built his empire from nothing. But the words she had spoken seemed to rattle him. She saw his jaw tighten. Maybe for the first time he was looking at her as more than just a servant. But it wasn't just that. She felt as though he was beginning to see her family, the invisible family that had been overshadowed by his money and influence. Samantha's words hung in the air, both an accusation and a plea for understanding. But before either of them could say anything more, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Celeste Delacroix, Victor's wife, entered the room with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Victor, darling," she cooed, wrapping her arms around his waist, "I think it's time to retire for the evening, don't you?" Victor seemed to snap out of whatever trance he was in. He turned away from Samantha, his eyes shifting back to their usual coldness. "Yes, I suppose you're right," he muttered, his voice now more controlled. He glanced at Samantha, his expression unreadable. "See that the rest of the house is in order before you leave tonight." Samantha nodded, though her mind was racing. Her words had struck a chord. She could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, but Victor had closed off, retreating back into his comfortable, distant shell. Celeste, on the other hand, had noticed the shift in the room. She was a woman who saw everything, a woman who had learned to hide her true emotions behind a perfectly maintained facade. Samantha didn't trust her. As the Delacroix left the room, Samantha was left alone with her thoughts. She should have felt relief. She had finally spoken up, finally pushed back. But instead, a gnawing sense of uncertainty took root. What had she started? What had she unleashed? Victor's response, though not hostile, was unsettling. She hadn't expected him to be quiet, to simply walk away. She had expected anger, punishment, but not this. not this strange, lingering tension. And then, as she cleaned the last remnants of dinner, a thought crossed her mind. What if Victor Delacroix was more than just the cold, powerful man she had believed him to be? What if, beneath all that wealth and arrogance, there was something different? Something that might not only change her life, but the life of her family? She didn't have the answer, but the seed had been planted. And for better or worse, she couldn't stop the feeling that Victor Delacroix was no longer just her employer. He had become something far more complicated. She had opened the door to a new world, one filled with questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. The clock struck midnight. The storm outside had calmed, but the storm inside the mansion was far from over. The next few days passed in a strange haze, as if time itself had slowed down. Samantha's usual routine was punctuated by an undercurrent of tension. Victor's words from that night lingered in the air, unspoken but felt by both of them. She couldn't get the image of him out of her mind, his eyes, his face, the way he had seemed almost vulnerable when she'd spoken her truth. It was unsettling, this new layer she had uncovered beneath the hard exterior of the billionaire. Celeste, too, was acting strangely. There were moments when Samantha would catch her staring at her from across the room, her expression unreadable. At first, she had thought it was just her imagination, but soon she realized there was something more to it. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and Samantha wasn't sure if it was a storm she should brace for or one she might be able to ride out. One evening, as she was preparing dinner for the Delacroix, she overheard them talking in the adjacent study. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for her to catch snippets of their conversation. "It's not about her, Celeste." Victor's voice was low but intense. "It's about something I've never seen before. She spoke to me as no one else has, and I can't stop thinking about it." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. What was he talking about? Was he referring to her? A part of her felt a surge of triumph. She had caught his attention, yes, but another part of her, the more cautious part, felt a pang of dread. What if this was a mistake? What if speaking out, speaking her truth, had only led her down a dangerous path? Celeste's voice broke through the fog of her thoughts. "Victor, you're being ridiculous. She's a maid, nothing more. She doesn't belong in our world. You're playing with fire." But Samantha could hear the doubt in Celeste's tone, something she hadn't expected. There was an undercurrent of something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just jealousy. There was something else, something more raw and vulnerable. But before she could think more on it, their conversation shifted again. Victor's next words sent a shock through her. "I don't know what it is about her, but I can't ignore it. I think she's changing me." Samantha's stomach churned. The man who had treated her like an invisible fixture in his life, the man who had looked down on her as if she were nothing, was admitting that she was having an effect on him. She had always known that people like Victor Delacroix didn't change. They were unshakable, untouchable. They played by their own rules, and everyone else was just a pawn in their game. But now he was admitting that she had somehow reached him. She felt a strange mix of anger and confusion. How dare he? After everything he had done, after all the insults, the dismissiveness, now he was changing because of her? It was infuriating. But at the same time, there was a flicker of something else, something more dangerous. Could she be falling into the trap of believing that someone like him could change, could actually see her as something more than just an employee? As she continued her work, the conversation echoing in her mind, she realized that she was caught between two worlds. One world, the world of the Delacroix mansion, with all its wealth, power, and cold perfection, was a world she had spent years navigating. The other world was one she had only just begun to understand, the world of Victor's vulnerability, his unexpected attention, and the strange pull she felt toward him. The storm inside her mirrored the storm outside the mansion. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up the facade of indifference. Something was happening, something she hadn't expected, and it was changing everything. Samantha wasn't sure if it was the beginning of something beautiful or something dangerous. But one thing was certain, her life would never be the same again. She had crossed a line and now there was no going back. The following days became a blur of conflicting emotions and moments of intense introspection. Samantha found herself caught in an inner battle, her heart and mind pulling in opposite directions. On one hand, Victor Delacroix's gaze, his words, the strange pull between them, all seemed to offer a glimpse of something she had never known, possibility. But on the other hand, her reality, the one she had spent her entire life navigating, was harsh, unforgiving, and filled with constant reminders of where she came from. She had spent years building walls around her heart, learning to protect herself from the world of the wealthy, from people like Victor. But now she was beginning to wonder if those walls were as strong as she had believed. There were moments when Victor's cold demeanor slipped, revealing the vulnerability beneath. There were moments when she thought she saw the flicker of something more in his eyes, a connection, something that went beyond employer and maid. But every time those thoughts crept in, she shoved them down, afraid to let herself believe in something that seemed so impossible. One evening, after the last of the dinner plates had been cleared, Victor approached her in the hallway. His presence, as always, was imposing. The tall figure in his sharp suit seemed to fill the space around him, making her feel small, even in her own skin. "Samantha," he said, his voice softer than she was used to hearing. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped. She had no idea what he wanted to say, but she knew it would change everything. She followed him into the study, the familiar scent of leather-bound books and polished wood filling the air. Victor stood by the window, staring out into the night, his back turned to her. For a long moment, he didn't speak. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Victor finally said, his tone hesitant, unlike his usual confident self. Samantha felt her breath catch in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but it trembled despite her best efforts. "About your family," he continued, turning to face her. "About your brother. He stopped, rubbing a hand across his face. "I've been an ass. I've treated you like you were beneath me, like you didn't matter. But you do matter. Your family matters." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. Was this really happening? Was this the same man who had belittled her, who had made her feel invisible for years? Her mind raced. Was this a game to him? A new form of control? Or was he truly trying to make amends? Samantha swallowed hard, her emotions swirling inside her like a storm. "It's not just about Jamal, Victor," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's about everything. It's about how people like you have all the power, and people like me, people like my family, are left with nothing. And no one cares. No one sees us." Victor looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I see you," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "I see everything you've been carrying, and He stopped himself, taking a deep breath. "I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try." Samantha felt her heart race, her mind unable to fully process what he was saying. Could she believe him? Could she allow herself to believe that someone like Victor Delacroix, someone who had lived a life of privilege, who had never experienced the pain and struggle she had, could truly understand her, could truly want to help? The question swirled in her mind, unanswered, as she stared at him. She had always thought of him as untouchable, but now she saw the cracks in the armor, the vulnerability beneath the facade. She didn't know what to do with it. Victor stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her senses. His eyes searched hers, a storm of emotions brewing behind them. "Samantha, The door to the study swung open abruptly, cutting him off. Celeste stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Victor, I need to speak with you. Now." Samantha's heart sank. She felt a cold rush of panic. This wasn't the moment, not with Celeste standing there, interrupting. She stepped back instinctively, afraid of the storm she could sense brewing between the two of them. Victor didn't move, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, frustration perhaps. "Not now, Celeste," he said, his voice low. But Celeste wasn't having it. "No, Victor, this is too important. You need to come with me now." Samantha felt the air grow thick with tension. She had no place in their world, no place in their marriage. The gulf between them seemed wider than ever. She had already pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in Victor's world, but now she felt the consequences looming. Victor hesitated, torn between Celeste's insistence and whatever he was about to say to her. It was a moment of vulnerability, one he wasn't used to showing. But before he could speak again, Samantha turned and walked out of the study, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't stay in the room anymore, couldn't endure the silent battle between Victor and Celeste. She had spoken her truth, she had put her heart on the line, but this was too much. It was too dangerous. As she retreated to her quarters, she felt the weight of the situation crash down on her. She had wanted change, had wanted to fight back, but now she didn't know what to think, what to feel. Victor's words, his vulnerability, had shaken her to her core. She had opened a door she couldn't close, and now the consequences were far beyond what she could have ever imagined. She had crossed a line and there was no going back. Samantha lay awake in her small, dimly lit room, the weight of the night pressing on her chest. The events of the evening had unfolded like a whirlwind. Victor's confession, Celeste's sudden interruption, the raw vulnerability she had seen in Victor's eyes. It was all too much. Her mind raced, replaying the scene over and over again, each thought feeding into another until everything felt tangled beyond recognition. She had wanted change. She had wanted to speak her truth, to finally stand up for herself and her family. But now she was beginning to question whether she had made a mistake. Had she opened Pandora's box, inviting chaos into her life, or had she unlocked something she couldn't fully understand yet? Her hands gripped the edge of her blanket, her fingers trembling. She had spent so many years protecting herself from people like Victor, keeping her distance, her heart carefully guarded. But now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure what was left of that armor. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on her door. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to open the door to know who it was. Victor's voice, low and hesitant, came through the wood. "Samantha, can we talk?" Samantha's heart pounded. She wanted to ignore him, to pretend nothing had happened, but she knew that would only make things worse. She had already crossed a line, and now it was time to face the consequences. She stood up, her legs unsteady as she walked to the door. With one final breath, she opened it. Victor stood in the hallway, his face shadowed by the dim light. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet desperation. For the first time, he looked human. Not the powerful billionaire who owned everything, not the man who had dismissed her and her family with a few cruel words, but a man who, for whatever reason, felt drawn to her, whose walls were as fragile as her own. "I'm sorry," Victor said, his voice raw. "I shouldn't have made you feel like you don't matter. You do, more than you know." Samantha looked at him, her chest tightening. "I don't need your apology, Victor. You can't just fix things with a few words. You've hurt people, and now you want to play the hero? It doesn't work like that." Victor's face darkened, but there was no anger in his eyes, only regret. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't ignore what's between us, Samantha. I can't ignore what I feel." Samantha took a step back, her mind spinning. The man before her, the one who had once seemed so untouchable, now seemed just as lost and vulnerable as she had felt for so long. But that didn't change the fact that he was still the same man, powerful, privileged, and capable of great harm. "You're right," she said, her voice quieter now, but firm. "You've hurt me, and you've hurt my family. And no matter how much you apologize, that won't just go away. But that doesn't mean I want revenge. I just want to know that I'm not invisible anymore. That people like me, people like my family, can matter." Victor's gaze softened, and for a moment Samantha thought he might reach for her. But she stepped back, needing the space, the distance. She had already allowed herself to believe in something she didn't fully understand, and she wasn't ready to let that hope consume her. She needed to stay grounded, to remember who she was and what she stood for. "I don't know what I'm doing, Victor," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "but I can't be a part of your world. I can't be the woman who changes you, who makes you feel better about yourself. I have my own life, my own family to take care of." Victor nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand, but I can't walk away from this either, Samantha. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I don't want to lose you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, emotions left hanging in the air. Samantha knew that this moment, this decision, would change everything. She had given him a piece of herself, a piece of her truth, and no matter where this went, she would never be the same. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, her heart aching. "But I can't be your project, Victor. I can't be something you fix to make yourself feel better." Victor seemed to take in her words, his face pained but resolute. "I'm not trying to fix you. I just want to be better for you, for us." Samantha closed her eyes, her thoughts swirling. She wanted to believe him, wanted to imagine a life where they could both change, where they could both heal. But she knew better than to build castles in the air. "I'm not asking for a fairy tale," she said, her voice steady now. "I'm asking for respect for my family, for me." Victor didn't say anything more. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Samantha standing alone in the dim light of the hallway. But in that moment, something inside her had shifted. She hadn't found the answers she was looking for, but she had made a decision. She was no longer invisible. She would no longer let herself be silenced, no matter who stood before her. Whether or not Victor Delacroix was a part of her future, she was in control of her own story now. She had crossed a line, and she would never go back. The next morning, Samantha found herself standing by the window of her small room, gazing out at the rising sun. The storm had passed, both outside and within her, and though the world was still a blur of uncertainty, a strange peace had settled over her. She didn't have all the answers. She wasn't sure what her future would look like, or whether Victor Delacroix truly understood the weight of what she had said. But something had changed within her. For years she had lived in the shadows, feeling insignificant, powerless, caught between her duties and the crushing weight of her family's struggles. But now, in the quiet aftermath of everything, she realized that she was more than just a maid, more than just the sum of the struggles that had defined her life. She was a person worthy of respect, of understanding, and of something deeper than the surface-level world she had been forced to inhabit. Victor had walked away, leaving her with her thoughts. She hadn't expected him to suddenly change or redeem himself. She had made it clear that she wasn't interested in being part of his world, not in the way he had hoped. She couldn't be his salvation, nor could she expect him to be hers. The dynamic between them was too complex, too fraught with power and privilege to be neatly tied up with a bow. But Samantha had taken something from that moment, something invaluable. She had taken back her voice. Her family still needed her, and the struggles she had fought for, especially with Jamal's troubles and her mother's declining health, hadn't disappeared. But now there was something different in the way she faced it all. She no longer looked at herself as invisible, no longer saw herself as someone who would always have to shrink, to hide, to play by the rules of a world that didn't care for her. As the days passed, the Delacroix mansion resumed its familiar rhythm. Victor, as distant as ever, remained an enigma, no longer the detached billionaire who dictated every moment of her life, but now someone she had spoken to as an equal. Celeste, on the other hand, continued her carefully orchestrated dance of smiles and glances. Nothing had fundamentally shifted in their world, but Samantha had changed the course of her own story. One evening, as she was leaving the mansion after her shift, her eyes caught the familiar sight of Jamal outside. He was standing there, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, a look of determination in his eyes. Samantha walked toward him, her heart lifting with a mix of pride and worry. "I'm getting out," Jamal said, his voice rough but resolute. "I've been talking to a lawyer. I'm going to turn things around, Sam, I swear." Samantha smiled, her chest tight. It wasn't the first time he had said something like this, but there was something different in his tone. For the first time, she could see the spark of hope in his eyes, the same hope she had long since forgotten. "You better," she teased, her voice soft with affection. "But remember, you've got to show up for this. You can't just talk about it, you have to make it happen." Jamal gave her a grin. "I'm not backing down this time, I promise." Samantha watched as he walked away, his back straight, his steps purposeful. She felt a small, quiet weight lift from her shoulders. Her family, her real family, her brother, her mother, were the ones who truly mattered, and she would be there for them just as she always had. For the first time in years, Samantha felt the stirrings of something she hadn't thought possible: hope. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small again. As she turned toward the street, the sun setting behind her, Samantha took a deep breath. The journey ahead wasn't easy, and she knew there would be challenges, but she had crossed a line, and she wasn't going back. She was writing her own story now, one where she too would be seen. And that, more than anything, was enough.